Tonight, this is how the DUP set out its immigration policy at the weekend.
No entry, no welcome, not even time to take off your coat.
That and the debate over trans issues are often characterised more by heat than light. For some people, it's about wanting a return to common sense politics, while others think it's part of a cynical culture war played out for votes. That's our main discussion tonight between the DUP and the SDLP. And then there were three. The real race for the Aras has kicked off. We ask if people on this side of the border really care. One-time presidential hopeful Deirdre Heenan and long-time presidential sceptic Newton Emerson will join me later. Hello. We know the traditional dividing lines and loyalties of politics are no longer as fixed as they once were, but what about the idea of nationalists sharing the same views as the DUP on several of today's key issues? That's the pitch that was made by the DUP at its conference last weekend. So what's the theory based on? I'm joined now by the SDLP leader and MP for South Belfast and Mid Down, Claire Hanna, and the North Antrim DUP MLA, Paul Frew. Welcome to you both. We're going to broaden the discussion in a moment or two, but I'll begin with both of you. Paul Frew, the transgender debate is an area of public policy that is complex and more often than not divisive, often toxic. Let's be honest. Why did your party colleague Jonathan Buckley decide to make it such a focus in his contribution at your party's conference over the weekend?
Well, Mark, I think it's because we see a trend. I think people are yearning for plain speaking, truth seeking, common sense politics. And I think people are sick and tired of being compelled to do something, being compelled to say something, being forced or coerced to think a certain way, and then to be cancelled if they don't. And I think people are sick and tired of politics being played out in that way, and they just yearn for plain speaking, truth seeking, common sense politics.
So you say you think people believe that to be the case. Do you know? I mean, what is this based upon? A hunch?
Well, when you talk about nationalists speaking to us, and we get contacted every single day by people who make a point of telling us that they're from a Catholic faith, they're from a nationalist background, and they tell us that to prove a point to us that we are now speaking for them. Now, we're not saying it's the majority. We're not saying it's more. We're saying it's many. And how I prove that is the fact that I get calls every single day into my office, on my phone, on social media, and people do make a point of telling me their background.
So they're exercised by this trans issue, first of all, and we'll come on to immigration in a moment too. They're exercised by that enough as Catholics, people with a nationalist background, to contact the DUP and say, we would consider, voting for you in the future because we think you articulate our worldview better than Sinn Féin and the SDLP?
Well, I think nationalist voters do feel let down by Sinn Féin and the SDLP over a period of years on various issues, not just about trans issue. I suppose it goes right back to the pro-life arguments, where there's a conservative Catholic. The SDLP used to be, in moral issues, conservative Catholic. They're no longer there now. They're not in that space. The DUP is the only party in the executive in that space, and I think a lot of people tell us that when they speak to us, and that's why they emphasise to us that they're from the Catholic faith.
But you're seeking, of course, just before I bring Claire in, you're seeking to make political capital out of this. Jonathan Buckley targeted what he referred to as the creepy coalition of Sinn Féin, the SDLP and Alliance, which sneers, bullies and ridicules. You're clearly looking for political advantage here.
And that's what woke politics is. They sneer at people, and people are sick and tired of that compulsion, that coercion, that cancel culture, and they've just had enough. And I think that's what they tell us. OK, well, let's bring Claire Hanna in. Are you worried that the DUP might have called this right?
I'm not. I've no doubt voters are complex. They always have been. People are influenced by very many things and they weigh up very many things when they vote. And I've no doubt that there are people who vote for me or who maybe come from the same background and don't vote for my party on whatever reason. But I think people do see this for what it is, which is very much a cynical distraction from, I suppose, an absence of ideas. Yes, things aren't going well here societally. in terms of public services, that's down to stop-start government, repeated collapses, including by the DUP, and the wasted Brexit years, and being tethered indeed to the UK that's failing. And I think instead of addressing any of those issues, instead of getting stuck in, people like Johnny Buckley choose to use their speaking time to do this reheated MAGA garbage that I don't think does appeal to very many people.
But this isn't an issue that's isolated only in Northern Ireland. This is an issue across the island of Ireland. It's an issue across the whole of the United Kingdom.
No doubt. There are big, as you said, complex issues. There are social policies, things that are evolving, and people have different views. I think what people don't agree with, even if they might differ with me on how I analyse some of these issues, I find people who vote for me agree with the ethical approach, which is rooted in compassion and not deliberately trying to divide and demonise and isolate people, which is what we're hearing in a lot of this rhetoric around trans people, LGBT people, and around the immigration debate. And the point is here, Mark, we'll have different policy ideas and outcomes on all sorts of areas in public services and infrastructure. Real people are getting hurt here. You know, when you go out and you throw out, some of this repeated stuff from Trump or whatever about immigration, people are literally getting their doors kicked in. People are getting their cars rolled by mobs on the back of this stuff. So you can disagree, and I'm all for creating space to tease out issues, especially when they are novel ideas and things that we all have to spend time getting our heads around. But I do think we have to be very, very clear on this. And no, I think the DUP have a very rigid worldview that most people in this region reject, and certainly most of the people that I come into contact with electorally.
Let's just broaden the conversation at this point. I want to bring in Marianne Buchanan-Stewart from the Women's Rights Network. Welcome to the programme, and thanks very much indeed for joining us tonight. You've been advocating for the position on biological sex, as per the ruling of the Supreme Court, for quite some time now. You discussed it with members of the Executive Office Committee at Stormont earlier this year. Do you feel vindicated by the way the conversation is going, not just tonight, but more generally in the public domain?
Things are definitely improving since the Supreme Court ruling. I think Claire said there about creating space to tease out ideas. We have repeatedly asked Claire for meetings, both WRNNI and our members on a personal level, and we have been refused. Sorry?
That's not true.
Claire Hanna says that's not true.
That's not true.
It is true.
We have lots of different groups around these issues.
You have never met us, Claire. You have never met us, so we have asked.
When did you ask? When did you ask?
I don't have the. I can send you that,
well,
but we have the
receipts. If you're going to make an
receipts.
assertion like that, you should probably come with the receipts. You know,
So just to be absolutely clear, let me just step in. To be absolutely clear, the meeting clearly hasn't taken place at this point. Just to be clear, if you were invited, would you be happy to sit down and chat?
Absolutely, okay, absolutely. So. And I do. It is important to create space. I understand, though, and as I say, whenever it is evolving policy, I think it is understandable when people are anxious about some of the bad faith. And I'm not suggesting, I don't know this organisation. I can understand why people have been anxious. I think there has been probably a tightening of language that hasn't helped people understand issues. But I can understand whenever conversations, and I have lots of conversations with people in everyday life about issues, including gender, that don't have to come from a place of division. So
maybe there's a positive step forward, Marianne, from your organisation's perspective tonight, that Claire Hanna said she is happy to sit down and have that conversation. We look forward to it.
With a productive agenda. I'm not coming in.
Okay, all right. So let Marianne set out her stall.
To be fair to Claire, she's not the only one that has refused. Alliance have refused, and Sinn Féin have refused. So
but the thing is,
she's not alone.
Loads of meetings with constituents.
We've clarified. Yep. Let's not waste any more time on this. We've clarified that Claire's happy to have that meeting at some stage in the future, and you can let us know how that goes and what was discussed on the agenda. Set out your stall for us, Marianne. What is the issue that you think people need to understand as far as this complex debate is concerned?
It's not terribly complex at all. The Women's Rights Network of Northern Ireland is a grassroots network, and it has members from all political persuasions. We're not the only group in Ireland either, which people need to remember. We have Not All Gays in the South, the Countess, Gaels for Fair Play, who are in the North and the South, fighting to keep men out of women's sports. and with Women's Space Ireland. So we're not the only group.
And your key point is what?
That a lot of our women are nationalists, so as well, and they're not going to vote for the SDLP.
Sorry, Marianne. Well, I want to specifically, maybe I should have been clear. What is your key point on the issue of the trans agenda and biological sex?
Well, we believe that biological sex is already the law, always was the law. Trans people didn't have the rights that they thought they had because they were told they had. The Supreme Court ruling didn't change the law; it clarified what already existed. So they haven't lost any rights.
OK, and are you pleased to hear Jonathan Buckley on Saturday at the DUP conference and Paul Frew in the studio tonight, effectively echoing, maybe not from the same political position, but echoing your worldview in terms of that trans debate?
Well, the unionists haven't been the only groups that have been prepared to meet with us so far. So, yeah, I'm happy to hear them speaking out and making it more of an issue. Women have been silenced on this. Women have lost their jobs over this. We've been thrown out of establishments because of this issue. Because the atmosphere.
Let's take the space to talk about where the concerns, because I genuinely, I'm interested to hear where you feel that there is a clash of rights, or where you feel how it is negatively impacting people.
Don't feel there's a clash of rights. This isn't a transgender rights. This is women's rights, and it's not. We're not against people who are transgender. We don't want to keep them out of women's spaces. We want men out of women's spaces. So women who pretend to be men are still welcome in women's spaces. But men pretending to be women belong in men's spaces.
But you do, I mean, I suppose the issue is, and we all know, and I'm sure everyone here agrees, we're dealing with a genuine crisis of violence against women and girls, but it's not anybody pretending to be anything. It is a problem. Men don't feel the need to pretend to be anything, to be violent and attacking. Why are we focusing on a very small and very often marginalised group of people and implying that they're acting in a predatory way that is quite simply not backed up by evidence? Surely if we campaign and work together on the wider issue of protecting women's rights, I'm acutely aware that so many of the disadvantages and barriers that women face are related to their biology, whether that's about having children or menstruation or menopause or issues around sexual harassment and violence. But I don't see why focusing on a really tiny number of people. I just don't really understand the links and how we can tackle those barriers and advance the cause of women.
So there's the question from Claire. What's your response to that, Marianne?
Well, things, right. We can't tell who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. They don't come with a label. So we keep all men out, regardless of how they identify. Right? But
the bad men they come in anyway. You know, they invade people's homes, they make attacks.
But Claire, if all the men are kept out, then women can shout out when a bad man enters. At the minute, women are silenced from calling out a man in their space, regardless of how he identifies. Also, with regards to sexual crimes, the statistics are there that trans prisoners have a higher rate of sexual offences than the general male population. It's a fetish in most cases, and those come with paraphilias, and they come with other paraphilias.
OK. I'm going to broaden the debate by bringing in Jerry Carroll in just a moment, Marianne. But before I do that, I just want to make one final point in this part of the conversation to you, and that is that you will be acutely aware that there are others who would share your feminist world view, and that you wouldn't be able to put a blade of grass between you and them on many issues, but who take a diametrically opposed position on this trans issue. How do you square that circle?
They're centering men and we're centering women. That's the difference. That's the blade of grass of a difference.
Okay, well,
I must say, I centre women in the policy I make and advocate, and men too, and people generally. It's not about, we're not
You centre women
about
and
policy,
men
it's
too.
about marginalising women.
Well, let's bring in Jerry Carroll at this point, the People Before Profit MLA for West Belfast. Welcome to you, Jerry Carroll. Thanks for making time for us tonight. Earlier this week, you took issue on social media with the DUP declaring a war on wokeness, which is what Johnny Buckley did at the weekend, and you wondered when the party has ever declared war on sectarianism, on poverty, on NHS privatisation, against homelessness. What's your point?
Yeah, Mark, and hopefully get a few minutes to speak about my point. The point being is I think what the DUP in particular are doing are deploying a cynical distraction. You know, we're seeing various Toy Town Trumps being rolled out to try and stick the boot in the migrants, stick the boot in the trans people, stick the boot into pretty much everybody that doesn't fit their particular worldview, to try and distract from a couple of things, distract from the crisis that they are in. And obviously, in part, a lot of this is being driven by their fear of the TUV, the fact that they're losing or have lost on both the Alliance Party and others as well. And also the fact that they are presiding over a crisis, like talk about the SEN crisis every single year. The DUP Education Minister is feeling the grapple with that. We've got a housing crisis caused not by migrants, but by landlords who are ripping people off and government inaction. Who is the Minister in charge of housing? Gordon Lyons. He's asleep at the wheel. We've got a housing crisis. We've got people being charged £1,100 per month on average in Belfast for rent, and the Minister is doing nothing about this. So this is classic distraction tactics, but I think people, for the most part, are seeing...
Well, I'm sure that the ministers you talk about would push back against that. I just want to pick up on something that's been said. Hang on a second. Between Marianne and Claire there, and I want to bring you into that bit of the conversation, and that is that your party and the Women's Rights Network claim to be pro-women's rights. Probably in many respects there wouldn't be that blade of grass that I referred to between you on many issues, but your positions are, as I understand it, polar opposites when it comes to the trans issue. How do you explain that, Jerry Carroll?
Explain what, Mark?
How do you explain your position on trans being the polar opposite of Marianne Buchanan Stewart's position when you both claim to be pro-feminist parties?
Yeah, well, I heard some of Marianne's positions, and I think there was a bit of fear-mongering from her. I don't know her full detailed position, but the point that my party and many other groups do, and I don't claim to speak for the women's sector in the north, but the majority of them are actually pro-trans and inclusive. And the threat, and as Claire alluded to it, the threat towards women usually comes from a man, a cisgender male that they know that they're a partner with, or an ex-partner, and not from trans people. And I think what's happening here is there's a real nasty agenda driven by the likes of Trump, the likes of Musk, and multi-billionaire, rich, usually white men who don't care about women, who don't care about migrants, and obviously are trying to stick the boot in particular in the trans people. And our party won't go along with it. We say that we're challenging and pushing back against that agenda because it's divisive, it's nasty, and really the logic will be they'll have police or inspectors outside of toilets, which will be a threat to trans people, but also every woman as well.
Okay, stay with us. I just want to bring Paul Frew back in again to deal with an issue that's particularly pertinent, I think. People might wonder, Paul Frew, when you're so vocal within the DUP about women's rights in the debate about transgender issues, how you square that with, for example, the lauding of Charlie Kirk, who believed the main role of young women is to marry and have children, or how does it square with his view of black women, who he criticised for getting jobs through affirmative action and questioned their brain processing power? How do you square this focus on women's rights with support for a man who said those things?
So we're talking about a man who was publicly assassinated for his beliefs. That should send shockwaves around this world. We have heard from Claire and Jerry tonight. They want to talk about every single important policy under the sun except what we're here invited to talk about, and that is the compelling people to say something that they know not to be true. And that's a really serious issue.
You believe it not to be true, that you can't say that they know it not. You can't say that they know it's not true.
We are compelling people to say something that they know is not true. And that is not good conscience.
Okay, can I just bring you? Can I bring you back to the Charlie Kirk issue? And I fully accept, and I'm sure our viewers will all accept, that the manner of his death is entirely reprehensible, and it's not what we're discussing here. And I'm not trying to lead you down that road at all, or in any way make a case for what happened. But I'm simply asking about what looks to me like a contradiction there. On the one hand, you say you're speaking up for women's rights, and on the other hand, many people within your party and many people who share your position would talk up Charlie Kirk, a man who did not take necessarily what many people would regard as an enlightened view of women's rights.
Well, Charlie Kirk was a family man with a family, a wife and children, and just because he had traditional views, you think then that's something that should be bad. The amount of young people who has contacted my office after the assassination of Charlie Kirk is immense. It's a wave that I've never experienced in my political life. And those young people come from a Christian conservative background, from both Protestant and Catholic backgrounds.
Okay.
And that is, to me, it's an amazing wave of sentiment.
All right. I want to broaden the conversation to bring in the other key plank of what we're talking about tonight, and that is immigration. Professor John Tong from the University of Liverpool joins us now. And John, you've been looking at people's attitudes to immigration here recently. You haven't published the results of your most recent research yet, but can you just give us a sense on the programme tonight of what you've been finding?
Well, opposition to immigration is not confined to the unionist community. It has to be acknowledged, because we've been asking the question, we've been putting the proposition since the Westminster election of 2010 and every subsequent Westminster election. Immigration has been good for the economy and society of Northern Ireland. And each time a majority has rejected that proposition. More unionists than nationalists rejected it, but there were majorities against that proposition across the sectarian divide. So, you know, we shouldn't run away with the idea that opposition to immigration is confined to within unionism. It's simply more extensive there. But if the DUP are chasing votes across the divide on the basis of immigration, I would say forget it, in the same way that some of the alignment of the DUP with socially conservative Catholics hasn't resulted in Catholic votes for the DUP. I think it's more about the DUP shoring up its own vote and concerns about immigration within its own community. You've got to put it in perspective. I mean, net migration to Northern Ireland is tiny. It's 0.03% of Northern Ireland's population. And if you look at the last Westminster election as well, only 7% of Northern Ireland's electors actually put immigration in their top two issues as to why they were going to vote the way they did. So I think we do need to keep it in perspective, but we need to be realistic as well. The idea that there's, love for immigrants in one community and hostility in the other, that's too much of a simplistic binary take.
John, can I ask you, how do you think the people you're talking to on the ground are formulating their views about the immigration debate? Where are they getting the information from? Who is influencing them? And where is the political leadership they might be looking towards, do you think?
Well, I think they're influenced by global right-wing forces. We did a whole series of focus groups with unionists, nationalists, neithers, women, young people. They all raised the issue of immigration in those post-election focus groups. There were concerns raised within each group, and there was a feeling that immigration couldn't be controlled by any government. So there are concerns there. How much they're influenced by the media, who knows? But people didn't have easy solutions. They tended to see those who were negative towards immigration. It was by no means everyone within those focus groups, but they tended to see it in economic terms. They saw them as a threat to access to jobs, to housing. So it was about economic insecurity more than anything else.
Paul Frew, your colleague Johnny Buckley talked at the weekend about other parties supporting uncontrolled illegal immigration. Where's the evidence of that?
So that's the point that should be raised here. This debate isn't about immigration. Immigration is positive. People movement has been as old as mankind itself. We, the Irish and the Ulster Scots, travelled all around the world.
It's a straw man argument. It is a straw man argument. Well, it's not true. So what parties? Tell me what parties in Northern Ireland support uncontrolled illegal immigration. Well,
that's the debate. That is the debate. We have a policy on immigration that's failed. So it's not a debate about immigration.
Johnny Buckley stood up and said the people are voting for the DUP and turning to the DUP because other parties are supporting uncontrolled illegal immigration. And I'm asking you to tell me, where's the evidence for that?
That is the output when we make this into an extremist argument that immigration good, immigration bad. That is not the argument to be had.
But there isn't any evidence. There isn't any evidence to say any of the other parties support uncontrolled illegal immigration, is there?
It's about a policy of immigration that has failed miserably.
Does the SDLP support uncontrolled illegal immigration?
Of course we don't. We support rules in general, and we know that the system is absolutely broken, a mess, particularly by the last government. I don't think any of this is debate because it's not illuminating, it's not actually finding solutions, and I think people see right through it, same way as DUP posturing on protecting women. It is a failure to accept difference. That's ultimately what we're talking about, and a lack of empathy. I think the main immigration problem that we have here, and we definitely have resource problems, certainly because of the failure to shore up public services, because of the failure to build houses, but it is ultimately our big immigration problem is young people leaving because they feel suffocated by the politics. But see this bit that we have, oh no, I don't mean those immigrants. It doesn't matter if you whip up the race hatred. It doesn't matter if you select the ones that like them because of their job. They all get the same racist abuse. Their kids all get called the same names in school.
I hear members of the DUP and the TUV on the airwaves often saying they can easily draw a distinction between people who are here, as they would say, illegally. Now, you may dispute that terminology. But they say they can draw a distinction between what they regard as illegal immigration and those people who are here working in the health service, working in social care.
But two things. One, the numbers, the illegal to the extent, and of course there's illegality in loads of areas of life. It's a relatively tiny, on UK numbers, it's I think less than 1% the people who are
of course they would say
arriving
you don't know how many illegal migrants there are in Northern Ireland because you can't count them.
You watch those videos of hard men in East Belfast. They're literally saying, I'm stopping your car based on the colour of your skin. They're not, buying, I'm differentiating between this healthcare worker. You talk to people, friends and neighbours, they're all receiving the same level of racist abuse.
Yeah, and that's the point, isn't it? When people were being attacked in places like Larne and Ballymena over the summer, those who were doing the attacking had no idea who lived behind those doors.
100%. And we condemned the violence. And the violence did a number of things. It created victims. People had to flee from their homes. They were moved out. The fear of young people being attacked. And the thing is this, the massive amount of people movement, that was all wrong. And also it means then that other people can label people as racist and right-wing when they're not, because all they are is concerned about an immigration policy that has failed. And Claire Hanna has admitted tonight that it has failed. Claire Hanna, we support everybody.
Hang on a second. Just worth pointing out that the police on the ground in Ballymena after the violence there during the summer said it was racist thuggery, pure and simple.
Yeah, and that's what they said. And we condemned all racist thuggery. And we have always condemned racist thuggery. But that doesn't mean that you label.
And then condemn the fire. But you know what has failed? Your housing policy. Why if these are housing issues, if we want to talk about policy failures, talk about the failure to keep a local government structure up and deliver for the basics.
And let me bring Jerry Carroll back in again. How do you deal with the charge that you might be one of those parties supporting uncontrolled illegal immigration, Jerry Carroll?
Well, it's fancy talk because, Paul has a notion that everybody wants to come live here. The fact is we have a tiny number of asylum seekers in this country, and Paul and his party colleagues quite often talk about the problems of asylum seekers and illegal migration, conflating the two, and it's really, really dangerous. It's playing with fire, and really what it does is it gives justification to people who want to go out in Ballymena, Larne or elsewhere and cause havoc, and Paul and his party, whilst they have helped to create the ideological ground for people to go out and cause racist violence, to say, for sure we're against the violence, but at the same breath, what they will also say is that people have legitimate concerns. Paul is a party, a leading person in a political party. He has a duty, which he and his party fail to do, to come out and dispel the myths about immigration and asylum seekers. And every single step, every single turn, his party have repeated lies and paid heed to that. So they have a responsibility to take a different path.
OK, you want to respond to that?
And yet I've done that tonight, but yet you don't hear me, Jerry. And that's the issue with this debate.
Where are people getting the view that these people are their enemy?
The Players' Party wanted to sack nurses a couple of years ago. So there are issues here that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the issues that we were on here for.
Where are people getting the impression, those people who are going and putting bricks through windows in Ballymena and in East Belfast, where are they getting the impression that the people behind those doors are their enemy? Are they getting it because of a constant drip of all the problems that are caused by immigration, because of this reheating of the culture war commander-in-chief in Trump that is all we seem to be getting in terms of any dynamism from the DUP? Do you not draw a connection between all of that rhetoric and people going out and thinking these people are their enemy and attacking them?
Because we're over time here.
Because people are just raising their concerns and their fears about an immigration policy that has collapsed.
But let's talk about how that affects people and why the immigrant is their enemy, because that's the impression they're getting. Well, why are they putting stuff through their windows?
How can you be in the minds of someone who throws a brick through a window? I'm not in their mind.
I can be in their mind. They're being told day after day that these people are the problem. This is why their life is rubbish. When the reason their life is rubbish is because of a slow economy and terrible governance.
Okay, listen, folks, we're out of time, but I suspect it's an issue that we will return to. I appreciate you all giving us the time to enter into the conversation tonight. Don't think we reached any firm conclusions, but at least we aired the debate. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's turn now to the upcoming Irish presidential election. We know there'll be just 3 candidates on the ballot when voters go to the polls to select a replacement for Michael D. Higgins. Joining me now to talk through the options and the implications are one-time would-be contender Professor Deirdre Heenan and the columnist Newton Emerson. So welcome to both of you and thanks for joining us. First of all, Deirdre, does this election matter in terms of Irish politics? And in particular, does it matter to people north of the border?
Oh, it matters. Of course it matters. We're electing a head of state. It may not have a formal role in terms of the constitution, but it has soft power, and the president and the office of the president reflects the views of the Irish people, is a voice for the people of Ireland, but also has an important international role and would be viewed as very important in terms of the diaspora, to speak for the diaspora.
And of course, for some people in Northern Ireland, that individual is, in their view, the head of state. Yes, I mean, there are people clearly who live north of the border who would regard the Irish president as the head of state rather than the British monarch.
They would, of course, they would view it as...
Even though they can't vote for that person.
Well, I think that's the ultimate irony. They view the president as their head of state, but it's ironic for them that someone from the north could run to be the president, but they don't have a vote. Yeah. And I think that's fairly unusual. Martin McGuinness was a classic example of that. Well, fairly unusual across the world, I would have thought. Yeah. And there have been promises to extend the franchise. It hasn't happened. It looks unlikely to be a major issue in this election, but I think there is a strong feeling that it is about time that we address this issue, that at least people who are Irish passport holders should have a vote.
If you had made it onto the ballot paper yourself, you could not have voted for yourself.
Exactly, which was a ludicrous position.
A bit of an ironic twist, for sure. Right, you wrote a very entertaining column, Newton, in the Irish Times this week. You likened the Irish presidential election to some kind of bizarre Eurovision Song Contest. You're not a fan?
Well, I mean, it is a serious contest, but it's a very unusual contest because the Irish president is essentially a symbolic figurehead. So it is as if you're electing a constitutional monarch. It is, I suppose, quite interesting from a British perspective to see how you do that, but the Irish public is essentially
or don't do it.
Or don't do it, but they decided they have to make a judgment about the mood of the nation and their view of the character of the nation. So that is quite interesting, yes.
And as far as this particular lineup is concerned, we now know there are 3 confirmed candidates. Do you think there is any particular interest for Northern Ireland in that election campaign? Obviously, a lot of the focus is on Heather Humphreys because she's a border county Presbyterian.
We're told that is the connection to Northern Ireland, and I'm sure that Heather Humphreys would be a great president for building friendly relations, but really it wouldn't be anything that Mary McAleese didn't do 20 years ago. As far as I could see, perhaps Heather Humphreys would bring something new to it. I think that the real significance of this election for Northern Ireland is that it shows that Sinn Féin is clearly having a major rethink on its political direction, and that's bound to have spillover consequences for Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Sinn Féin's decision not to run a candidate, right call or mistake in your view?
Well, I think it's extraordinary because they are painting it as coming from a position of strength, that this was somehow a strategic decision. I think they ended up in a position that they had no other option. It was clear that they couldn't win. They weren't in a position to win, so they either ran no candidate or supported a candidate. They've decided to support Catherine Connolly and talk about this left-leaning coalition, and perhaps this would be a trial to see if it works. Could they then depose the partnership that exists at the moment? But the difficulty with this left-leaning coalition is they're all over the place. They're full of contradictions.
And Sinn Féin cannot control what Catherine Connolly says during the campaign.
Absolutely not. But
obviously.
But it is a reflection on Sinn Féin that we talked about, this powerful machine that had all this strategising, all this political nous, and they end up in a position where they don't have a candidate to run.
And no presumably if Sinn Féin thought it could win the Irish, it would have run a candidate.
It would, of course, and I think that they had a very good chance of winning with Mary Lou McDonald, but the risks of that and of losing their leader just weren't worth paying. But whether they're sincere or not in backing Catherine Connolly, they're now taking a position until at least the next general election in the Republic of claiming that they're leading a left-wing alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and so they're now going to have to take that position unless they decide to come up with something completely new.
And does it damage Sinn Féin if Catherine Connolly doesn't win?
I think that if, not particularly, and I think that they could benefit if she got a good showing on first preferences, but they wouldn't. I mean, I don't think it would be a very good thing for Sinn Féin if she won, because then they would be tied to a liability for 7 years. What they're tied to instead now for the rest of the decade is this idea of leading a left-wing coalition, and that will restrict the kind of policies that they can implement at Stormont.
OK. Heather Humphreys' links to the Orange Order, relevant or not?
Well, I think what was interesting was her response to the question. When she was asked the question, she was defensive. She seemed to be taken aback by the question, where actually she should have said, so what? So what about my links to the Orange Order? What's the relevance to the position that I'm seeking?
And the links are through her husband,
The links are through her husband. Yeah. They're over 5 decades ago. Her father was in the Orange Order. Her grandfather signed the covenant in the Irish. But so what? I mean,
but the Daily Mail, the Irish Daily Mail in particular, has made this an issue about openness and transparency. It had 5 pages on the Sunday edition of the paper explaining why it ran the story it had run.
Well, first of all, it's the Daily Mail. I think really what she should have been saying is push back to that to say, of course, Irish means diversity. There is no issue with her being in the Orange Order. And think about her background.
For some people, there appears to be.
Well, no, for the Irish Daily Mail there appears to be. I think wider society dismissed it, didn't really give it any headroom, and their only surprise was that she was defensive. She was caught on the hop. But the issue is, what is Irishness? Irishness is about diversity. We can't have this narrow view to say you can't be in the Orange Order. And also, given her background and the fact that she lived along the border, I also came from a rural community. Many of my neighbours were in the Orange Order. It was a very different organisation to the one that we might associate with cities and Belfast. It was a rural community organisation, and I think there isn't an issue, and the pushback on that now has happened. I think the difficulty for Heather is she isn't good at being caught on the bounce, but she is brilliant in the community. She is brilliant in the community centres, and that's where her strength lies.
OK, Jim Gavin, the Fianna Fáil candidate, a popular figure certainly in Dublin, but not clear that he's going to break through elsewhere.
Well, it's early days, but he just really doesn't seem to have momentum, and I would not expect him to be to win, really. I mean, I think that he's got off to a very bad start. Funnily enough, forgetting to close a farm gate seems to have been what has antagonised
that appears to be an issue. Do you think if Deirdre had been on the ballot paper, she'd have been in with a shout?
Oh, absolutely. I think we certainly all we'd all have voted for her if we could have.
Yeah. Well, not this time round.
Not this time round. It's one of the few jobs I could say maybe I thought I was too young for.
Well, Mary McAleese was elected president at 46. Well, we'll not pursue that particular issue. Listen, we need to leave it there. Thanks both very much indeed. We'll watch the campaign with interest. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock on BBC One. We'll have coverage of the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Do join me for that. Until then, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Good night.